the Witch King of Angmar, the Lord of the Ringwraiths, and one of Sauron's most powerful servants, responsible for the fall of the northern kingdom of Arnor and the leader of the Siege of Gondor. Hello friends, it's Scar here, and in today's episode we'll be delving into the history of the Witch King of Angmar, the chief of the Nazgul. So the Witch King was once a mortal man who lived sometime during the Second Age of Middle-earth. When the One Ring was created in the year 1600 of the Second Age, Celebrimbor withheld the other lesser rings from Sauron, though in the year 1697, Sauron launched an attack on Eregion and he succeeded in capturing the lesser rings. Considering this, it's reasonable to assume that the Witch King lived around or after this time, since it's the earliest that Sauron could have given out the Rings of Men. Now his mortal life is a lot more ambiguous, whether he was a king, a powerful sorcerer, or some lord. We know that three of the Nazgul were black Númenóreans that had settled in Middle-earth and subjugated the people living there, such as the Haradrim. It does seem plausible that the Witch King was one of these black Númenóreans, considering he was the leader of the Nazgul. There's also an interesting passage in the Fellowship of the Ring, which I feel increases the plausibility of this idea. When Frodo crosses the River Brunnen to reach Rivendell, he is being chased by the Nazgul, though they stop near the water's edge. We're then told that the leader of the Nazgul urged his horse forward, and that he was followed closely by two other Ringwraiths. It's quite a coincidence that only three of the Nazgul dare to cross the river, considering that three of the Nazgul were black Númenóreans originally, a race of men known for their link with the sea and water. Once again, this is merely speculation, but I feel it's quite fitting, and it adds a bit more depth to the Witch King's story and the attacks he led on the Númenórean kingdoms of Arnor and Gondor. Despite this, there are also points that could suggest a different story, as the Witch King is heavily linked with sorcery, his very name implies this, and the Haradrim were known for their cults dedicated to magic. Perhaps he was one of the black Númenóreans that ruled over the lands of the Haradrim, and with time became captivated with their cults. The first of the Númenórean settlements in Middle-earth started around the year 1800 of the Second Age, which would mean that if the Witch King was a black Númenórean, he'd have lived after this time. Through the Ring of Power, he obtained glory, great wealth, and a prolonged lifespan, though these came at a terrible price. For he slowly turned into a wraith, vanishing from the physical world and doomed to serve Sauron's will unquestioningly. According to the appendices in The Return of the King, the Nazgul first appeared around the year 2251 of the Second Age. Though we know nothing else concerning their whereabouts during the Second Age, it's likely that they played a part in Sauron's attacks on Gondor, such as the Siege of Minas Ithil or the Battle of the Last Alliance. However, following Sauron's defeat, we're told that the Ringwraiths went into hiding in the year 2441 of the Second Age. The Witch King then reappeared in the year 1300 of the Third Age, when he established the realm of Angmar in the northernmost part of the Misty Mountains. Its capital was Carn Dûm, and it is said that the Witch King gathered many evil men and orcs and other fell creatures. During his reign, he was simply known as the Witch King, while his identity as the chief of the Nazgul would remain unknown until many years later. We're told that he came north with the purpose of destroying the Dúnedain in Arnor, seeking hope in their disunion, while Gondor was strong. Considering this, his general goal was to weaken the realms of Arnor and Gondor, and he chose to attack Arnor because at that time it was already in a weakened state. For strife had grown in the once united realm of Arnor, and it was split into three separate kingdoms, that of Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rudar, and these kingdoms often had fights and skirmishes against one another. Seeing opportunity in their conflict, the Witch King launched an attack on the kingdom of Rudar, which fell easily, for few Dúnedain remained there, and it was ruled by an evil lord of the Hillmen who was secretly in service to Angmar. With Rudar in his grasp, the Witch King's attack on Arnor continued, though an alliance of Arthedain, Cardolan, and the Elven realm, Lindon, managed to drive him back for a while. However, in the year 1409, the Witch King unleashed a great host from Angmar that broke through their defenses and surrounded the fortress of Amon Sul. This fortress was razed to the ground and burnt, and it would later be known as Weathertop. With the fall of Amon Sul, what remained of the Dúnedain retreated, though the Witch King was quick to pursue them. He pushed through and ravaged the realm of Cardolan, though some of the Dúnedain managed to hold him off at Tin Gortad. It is said that a force of elves from Rivendell and Lindon once again came to the Dunedain's aid, and they were successful in pushing back Angmar, bringing peace to the land once more. However, around year 1600, a plague swept across Middle-earth, and the vast majority of the people of Cardolan perished. The Witch King then sent out evil spirits from Angmar to possess the bodies in the Barrow Downs of Cardolan, turning them into Barrow-wights. Following the Great Plague, it took the Witch King around 400 years to strengthen and gather his forces, and in the year 1974, the Witch King launched his final assault on Arthedain's capital, Fornost, which fell to his forces. The king of Arthedain, Arvedui, fled to the north, to the lands of Forokel, where a ship awaited him to sail him to Lindon. However, tragedy befell him, as after boarding it and setting sail, a great storm of wind and snow arose, and it drove Arvedui's ship into the ice, which crushed it and killed all those aboard. It's believed that the sudden storm was the Witch King's doing, and that he had summoned it. After conquering Fornost, it is said that the Witch King chose to live there, and he filled the once proud and ancient fort with evil beings. His reign here would not last long though, for the southern kingdom of Gondor had sent an army led by Prince Earnor, who together with the elves of Lindon, led by Círdan the Shipwright, and the remnants of the Dunedain of the north, marched together towards Fornost as a great host. Though the Witch King was sly, he was also proud, and his pride caused him to lead his forces out of Fornost and to meet his enemies in open battle, rather than waiting for them to lay siege. They met on a plain of land between the Nenwil and the Nord Downs, and a great battle took place there. However, the fury of the host of the west overwhelmed his forces, and the forces of Angmar attempted to retreat back to Fornost, though before they could reach it, some of the horsemen from the host of the west had ridden forth and blocked their path north, causing the forces of Angmar to scatter in a great rout. Seeing his dire situation, the Witch King tried to gather and salvage what remained of his forces, hoping to flee towards his own land of Angmar and fortress of Carn Dûm. However, once again, cavalry blocked his path, and they were led by Prince Earnor of Gondor, and these were soon joined by an elven host led by Glorfindel. It is said that the forces of Angmar were utterly defeated, and that no evil man or orc was left alive west of the mountains. When the Witch King saw his forces' defeat, he appeared upon a black horse, emanating an aura of fear and focusing all his hatred upon Earnor, the Prince of Gondor. So terrible was the Witch King's fury that Earnor's horse turned and fled, though Earnor had been ready to stand his ground. The Witch King then laughed, though he stopped abruptly and fled when Glorfindel rode towards him. Earnor, in his anger, wanted to chase him and hunt him down, though Glorfindel stopped him and uttered the famous words: "Do not pursue him, he will not return to this land. Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man will he fall." Following these events, the Witch King saved his chief hatred for Earnor, and his vengeance would eventually arrive. The Witch King fled all the way back to Mordor and gathered the other Ringwraiths to him. In the year 2000 of the Third Age, he led an army towards Minas Ithil and laid siege to it, and it fell to his forces merely 2 years later. The Witch King then transformed Minas Ithil into a place of fear and terror, earning it the name Minas Morgul, and he became its lord and ruler. When Earnor became King of Gondor, the Witch King sent out a challenge of single combat to him and taunted him, knowing how rash the king was. Though Earnor was eager to accept the challenge, his steward convinced him not to. Though 7 years later, the Witch King repeated this challenge, and Earnor accepted it. He then rode out with an escort of knights and entered Minas Morgul, and they were never seen or heard from again. The next appearance of the Witch King was during the events that led to the War of the Ring, in the year 2018 of the Third Age. Sauron had first sent out the Witch King and the other Ringwraiths to launch an assault on Osgiliath, and they were successful in capturing its eastern half before Sauron stopped the attack. He used this to give a false impression that the Ringwraiths were sent out as part of his war on Gondor, when instead he wanted them to search for the One Ring. Thus, the Witch King and the other Ringwraiths were ordered to travel unmounted and unclad, and so invisible to the naked eye, though those that passed near them would feel terror and a sense of unease. They travelled north from the Anduin, seeking the Shire, though this mission proved fruitless as they were unable to find it. Thus, they were left with no choice but to return to Mordor, where Sauron's disappointment and anger awaited them. When they arrived, Sauron informed them that he suspected that Saruman knew the location of the One Ring and possibly the Shire, and so he sent out the Nazgul to interrogate him. This time, speed was crucial and secrecy was abandoned, and so the Nazgul rode in haste to Isengard. We're told that the Witch King stopped in front of the gate of Isengard, and that he heard the voice of Saruman telling him that he knew they sought the ring, and that they should hunt down Gandalf for information regarding its whereabouts. The Witch King then rode to Rohan to search for and hunt down Gandalf. Here he came across a lucky encounter, for he met Grima Wormtongue, who was on his way to report to Saruman. Wormtongue, overcome by terror, revealed the location of the Shire to the Witch King, and the Witch King chose to spare his life, for he saw in Wormtongue a twisted form of evil, one that could possibly do great harm to Saruman if he was allowed to live. The Witch King then divided the Nazgul into 4 pairs to search for the Shire, while he travelled with the swiftest pair. As he journeyed, he came across 2 spies that served Saruman, and one of them carried detailed charts and maps of the Shire. The Witch King took these and allowed the spies to return to Bree, though he informed them that they no longer served Saruman but Sauron instead. Before entering the Shire, the Witch King visited the Barrow Downs, where he stayed there for some days, rousing up the Barrow-wights and other evil spirits that lay there. He then attempted to enter the Shire via its southernmost border along the Sarn Ford. However, he was met with resistance from some Dunedain rangers. It is said that some of the rangers fled northwards to bear news to their chieftain, Aragorn, though most of these were slain or driven away by the Nazgul. Others attempted to hold the ford and keep the Witch King at bay, and we're told that they managed to hold it while the day lasted, though at night the Witch King fell upon them and slew them or swept them away. After failing to capture the hobbits before they left the Shire, news reached the Nazgul of a hobbit vanishing in Bree, and the Witch King decided to travel to Weathertop, as he believed the hobbits might pass through that region. There, the Nazgul waited for the hobbits, though despite their plans, they faced a different foe. For Gandalf had escaped Isengard, and after traveling to Bree, he rode to Weathertop. It is said that when he arrived, the Nazgul withdrew, for they were reluctant to face him during the daytime. Instead, they waited for night to fall, and they encircled and attacked Gandalf. We're told that there was a great battle of light and flame, and that Gandalf had managed to hold them off, before fleeing to the north. 4 of the Nazgul chased Gandalf, while the Witch King and the other Nazgul remained outside of Weathertop, waiting for the hobbits. 3 days later, Frodo and his companions arrived there and set up camp. Once again, as night fell, the Witch King and the other Nazgul approached Weathertop, though this time only 5 of them were present. During the battle that followed, Frodo put on the ring, which drew the Nazgul's attention to him, and the Witch King approached him and stabbed him in the shoulder with a Morgul blade. Aragorn then intervened and succeeded in scaring the Nazgul away with fire, though time was now on their side, for the tip of the blade that pierced Frodo had broken off inside him, and it was slowly corrupting him. As Aragorn led the hobbits to Rivendell, they encountered the elf Glorfindel, who had been sent out to find them. Together they decided that Frodo would ride with Glorfindel upon his horse to Rivendell. As they rode towards Rivendell, they caught sight of the Nazgul galloping behind them. As they reached the fords of Brunnen, Frodo turned towards them, waving his sword and shouting at them to return to Mordor. The Witch King then urged his horse to step into the water and raised his hand, and it seems that he cast some spell of sorts, for it rendered Frodo speechless and shattered his sword. However, before the Witch King could reach Frodo, a roaring wave approached him from the Brunnen, one that was summoned by Elrond, and it overwhelmed the Nazgul and their steeds and swept them away. Following these events, the Nazgul fled back to Mordor to be recloaked, and we next encounter the Witch King when Frodo, Sam and Gollum are climbing the stairs of Cirith Ungol. Here we see the Witch King leading his forces out of Minas Morgul to initiate the Siege of Gondor, though he suddenly stops, and we're told that he was troubled for a moment, for he could sense that there was some other power in his valley. Despite this, he chose to march on forward, for he was in haste to bring war upon the West. In the letters of Tolkien, letter 210, Tolkien states that when the Witch King was put in command of Sauron's forces during the Siege of Gondor, he was empowered, as he is given an added demonic force. The Witch King led his army to Osgiliath, which fell to his forces, as he left terror and fear in his wake, and few dared face him. While trying to breach the Great Gate of Gondor, the Witch King weakened the gates with sorcery, while Grond, the battering ram, was thrust at the gates. We're told, then the Black Captain rose in his stirrups and cried aloud in a dreadful voice, speaking in some forgotten tongue words of power and terror to rend both heart and stone. Thrice he cried, thrice the great ram boomed, and suddenly, upon the last stroke, the gate of Gondor broke. As if stricken by some blasting spell, it burst asunder. There was a flash of searing lightning, and the door stumbled in riven fragments to the ground. With the gate in ruins, the Witch King rode through, and all those who faced him fled. However, Gandalf remained, standing his ground in defiance, and the Witch King flung back his hood and revealed a kingly crown that sat on an invisible head. His eyes were red fires, and he lifted his sword and flames ran down the blade. However, before he could face off Gandalf, horns rang out from the Pelennor fields. Rohan had arrived, and the forces of Mordor quailed in fear. And so the Witch King chose to leave the gate and face the forces of Rohan before victory could slip away. He mounted upon a fell beast and took to the skies, and he located King Theoden of Rohan. He then descended upon him, wielding a great black mace. The one rider of Rohan, called Dernhelm, remained by Theoden's side. This was Eowyn in disguise, and with a swift stroke she beheaded the fell beast, which fell to the ground. As the Witch King rose from his fallen steed, he swung his mace at Eowyn, shattering her shield and breaking her arm. He then towered above her and raised his mace for the killing blow. Though before he could land it, Merry approached him and stabbed him in the knee. This caused the Witch King to cry out in pain and stumble forward. And Eowyn then struggled up, and with the last of her strength she drove her sword between his crown and mantle. Her sword shattered, and the Witch King's crown rolled away, as his mantle and armor fell to the ground, shapeless and empty. This was accompanied by a cry that went up into the shuddering air and faded to a shrill wailing, passing with the wind. A voice bodiless and thin that died, and was swallowed up, and was never heard again that age of this world. Before I end this video, I'd like to point out that I'll be covering the Witch King's weaponry and other traits of the Nazgul in another video, as I wanted this one to focus mainly on his history. Anyway friends, I hope you enjoyed this video and that it wasn't too long. If you can, leave a like cause it helps this channel immensely, and subscribe to join our fellowship today. I hope to see you all in my next video, where together we'll once again explore the magical world and lore of Middle-earth.